So since we're just after the top of the hour, unless there's anything else, Carolyn, that was awesome. I love that you know him, Mary. And we're going to get started with Barbara's presentation, and I'm going to hand it over to Ben to do the introduction for Barbara. But I just want to say, Barbara, thank you so much. It's awesome working with you up on the Hill, and I'm sure this is going to be a great and inspiring program. And Ben's going to do your introduction.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I've had the pleasure to work with and know Barbara since I started here at the lab, really. She was already engaging with the Hill in collaboration with Paul. And if any of you have seen the This Piece of Earth book that Paul helped put together, Barbara has some beautiful elements in that, as well as in a volume of the Journal of the Southwest I helped edit. Paul and Barbara and others had a great chapter on the early form of the Tumamoc Arts program. And again, Barbara had some wonderful drawings. And in fact, her image of the swirl graces the cover of that issue. And so that really, so I was familiar with Barbara's work, but when we engaged on the Tumamoc Tour project that Paul and I dug deep into, I just, through that process, kept working and leaning, have more and more and more on Barbara's expertise and ability to really decipher how to communicate a lot of the topics we were trying to get through to the public in a really great way, from her writing the scripts of many of the short videos you saw, and ultimately the breakthrough on what was originally the app logo, but has since become much more broadly used, of the Friends logo. And just really succinctly breaking through a hurdle that Paul and I could not break through in terms of how to distill the core elements here of the lab. So Barbara's work as an artist and communicator of science is really impressive and has benefited the Hill dramatically in many ways, and perfectly coalesced in this new project, which I'm eager to learn about, because I've just heard bits and pieces or seen a page here and there, but definitely not in the full form that I think you'll be sharing with us tonight, Barbara. But a really exciting project, and we're so fortunate to have your work and perspective as part of the lab, and thank you for sharing with us tonight.
Okay, well, geez, thank you, Ben. I really appreciate that. I have been kind of just teasing people about this project, so I thought this would be a good opportunity to really come out and say what I'm actually doing. So let me screen share. This is going to take a few extra seconds because my computer's strange, but here we go. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we can see you.
Yep, and I still look like a cartoon character myself. Anyway, this is the title of the project. It's called Red Flowers. And what I want to do is walk you through where I am to date. Most of the illustrations in here, if they're not credited, are from the Red Flowers project itself. And they're little details of various pages. Towards the end of the talk, I'll show you the entire pages, but as we proceed through the talk, I'll just continue to tease things. Okay, so last year I started this project which I titled Red Flowers, and I'm about halfway through the story drawings. So this is very much a work in progress. But what I want to do at this point is describe the project a little bit and let you know what my progress is to date. Oops, don't do that. Okay. So what's a graphic story? Well, it's kind of an unusual medium. What these kinds of stories do is they combine both the strengths of images and the strengths of words in a single medium. And in a way, you can think of these things as something like movies on paper. Okay, they have scenes and a progression and dialogue and visuals and so on. So some examples are graphic novels, manga, Japanese comic books, I guess you'd call them, or novels, comic books, and some others. So this particular vignette I've got here is of a tarantula hawk wasp on Ocotillo. I don't think they're the most common of visitors, but they do show up now and again. Okay, so graphic stories are part of popular culture. In most cases, they are written and drawn to entertain people, but they can teach, they can explore issues. And among the issues some of them explore are how we feel about nature, natural systems, how we understand them, how we approach them. And they're also accessible to many people. You can go online and buy one from Amazon or buy something from some of the comic book clearinghouses or buy manga editions and so on. So they're easy to get your hands on. There's no restriction on who can and cannot. This particular cover I'm showing you is the first episode or issue or volume, I guess it would be, of Great Pacific, which is a story about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And Joe Harris is a science fiction writer. He writes for TV, things like The X-Files and so on. And he took some liberties with this. If you take a boat to the Great Pacific Garbage Patch and jump off the boat, you're going to be treading water. You're not going to be walking on some kind of weird plastic landform like this, but he essentially took the idea and ran with it. And he did it in part because some years ago, he started reading about this and was shocked at how few people had ever even heard of the darn thing. Okay, so how did I end up doing this? Well, you know, Ben started talking about the Tuamac app, and in part, the Tuamac app is, I don't know, the grandfather of this idea. I was writing, the app stories they're basically little nonfiction stories about 300 words in length with a fairly brutally imposed restriction on that length. You just can't be wordy in that particular medium. But somehow it made me think about writing fiction, writing stories. And so I kind of put that away in the back of my head. And then a bit after that, after numerous decades of not paying the slightest attention to things like comic books, I looked at one and I discovered that the medium had changed, that it used to be stories printed on newsprint, so kind of crude printing. But now if you pick up a comic book, it's printed on glossy paper. The colors are gorgeous. And in many cases, the drawings are stronger because artists have a chance to spend more time on them. So this illustration is by Paul Maroka. He did the illustrations for the app, and this is just a really charming one of a mule deer fawn and its mother. Okay, so as I was putting this together, I tried to come up with some goals for the story itself. And I wanted to talk about Sonoran Desert natural history, kind of the things you can see on a walk in the desert in your own backyard without needing a microscope or a chemical assay or someone to interpret the statistics for you, et cetera, et cetera. I just wanted to immerse people in the desert and see some of the remarkable interactions that happen right before our eyes over and over again. And I wanted the story to be as richly visual as I could make it. And I wanted it to be kind of fun, you know, I wanted people to enjoy themselves. So, a little bit about writing graphic stories. There's kind of two things about writing. One is the things you see when you read a graphic story and the things you don't. And the things you don't are kind of the cues and things like that you see in a script for a play or a movie. The writers create the characters, you know, descriptions and what they're likely to do. They block out the plot. And in the case of a graphic story, that's, like page 4, panel 1 will have this in it. Panel 2 will have this in it. You know, somebody runs up a hill or opens a door or something like that. And then what you see, what you read, is text for anything that can't be drawn. So what the characters say, what they're thinking, the sounds like a bird call or an explosion, and so on. And the other constraint they have, just as in the app, is they have to keep the word counts low. And this one is kind of an example of this. I wrestled with the idea of defining pollination, since that's one of the interactions you see with ocotillos. And as I thought about it, I found that, well, I'm going to be getting in the weeds on this. I got to talk about anthers and stamens and pistils and filaments and styles and ovaries and pollen grains and animal pollination and wind pollination. So you can suddenly get very complex, maybe professorial, although that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I don't think it's suitable for this medium. So in this case, rather than define pollination, what I did was I gave an example. Essentially, when birds and insects carry pollen from one flower to another, they're pollinating. And we, of course, assume in this that it's the same species of flower in both donor and recipient of pollen. So this is a pretty good example of simplifying things as extensively as I could, while at the same time trying to be as honest and informative as I can. Okay, so drawing graphic stories, essentially, I don't know, maybe 60% of the story in this medium is the artwork. So artists draw essentially everything you see that you would see in a movie. For example, artists draw in this medium. Everything that a writer would describe, how the character looks, what the setting is, and so forth, this is drawn by the artist in this particular medium. Okay. And traditionally, graphic art utilized outline. So we have an outline of this bird. This is a rufous hummingbird, a male. We can see the secondary flight feathers outlined here, and the anthers outlined here, colored in yellow. So outline and flat or uniform color. So this is uniform color here, so there's no change in the tone of this brown. But with the advent of digital art, which is the standard now in making these kinds of stories, you can now add things like a bit of shading. So I have shading on the ocotillo flower here, a little bit of yellow highlight up here, same with shading there on the bird's head. And I could put in a transition showing how the iridescent throat feathers shift color according to the angle of reflectance from the throat feathers. So rufous hummingbirds like this guy, they're migrants. They do come through, they do visit ocotillos. but usually they're on their way north in the spring when they visit Ocotillos. Okay, so we have writing and drawing. Sometimes one person does both. And that's what I'm doing this time around because this is a new thing for me. I've never done anything like this. And I was deeply interested in figuring out what the heck I was doing and how to do it. So handling both seemed like a good way to teach myself on the fly there. The next few slides, I think I just have three or four, something like that, are examples of some work by others that influenced my drawings for red flowers. This is a photo of me at Havasupai, taken by my friend, Jay Robinette. Okay, this is an old strip. This is marked Trail. It's still running. This particular panel or story was probably put together in 1963, right around the time that Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring. And in this one, he talks about pesticides from this crop duster getting into water, groundwater we might drink, harming livestock and wildlife and fishes and so forth. And then down here, he gives a real nice illustration of pesticides and the food chain they'd move up in aquatic systems, right up to fish that we or the silhouetted bear might eat. And I read this serial when I was a kid. Used to show up in the newspapers as a weekly serial where Mark Trail, this character, would catch various kinds of bad guys. And that mostly went over my head. But on Sundays, he had strips like this about natural history. You know, you could read about raccoons or Venus flytraps or something like that. And I always looked forward to it. So I guess it kind of stuck in my mind. And another influence on me that's also been a lifelong influence is Japanese woodblock prints. I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but I'll give it a try once. And that's ukiyo-e. So that could be Japanese with a Massachusetts accent. But similar to graphic novels, oddly enough, or graphic stories, this medium tends to use both outlines. So we see outlines of this lily flower here, and mostly flat color, like these green lily pads and so on. And one thing that always engaged me about many of the prints you see in this medium are that plants and animals are really intimately observed. So this is a dragonfly, and it's ovipositing. You can see some dragonflies doing this in North America. The female flies low over the water. She bends her abdomen down, releases an egg, and then she skips a few feet ahead, repeats and repeats and repeats. And if you look carefully enough, you can see that, you know, on some quiet freshwater pond. Interestingly enough, although I've always considered this fine art, these prints were considered part of popular culture. They were prints, they were not fine art originals. Some of these were printed in the thousands. I read that some were in editions of like 8,000 prints and so on. And this particular medium is dying because it's so incredibly labor intensive. Despite all that, some of the images have achieved the stature of fine art, and I think deservedly so. Here's another example. Another facet of these kinds of these pieces is that people are usually shown living harmoniously with nature. So let me get out of the way of the title there. And so you can see a couple of boatmen here on a snowy day, and tucked into the landscape here are some buildings and so forth. Another thing that's remarkable about this medium is that many of the compositions are quite sophisticated. I didn't crop this image, but here's this stone lantern that's way at the edge of the picture. Another one that's kind of partially cut off. And then this wonderful snowy tree. And these things combined balance the weight of this red Tory structure. So it's very different from something in which you might have the central feature being humans with these kinds of things in the background. And I just like the approach. I don't know that I've put humans in many of my pieces to date, but I hope to show them in ways something similar to this. Another influence is scientific illustration. And this is a really wonderful piece by Sarah Landry in sociobiology, which was or is an informative resource that I think E.O. Wilson meant to be accessible to the general public. It's very readable. We lost E.O. Wilson just a few weeks ago. I had an opportunity, I think it was the late 70s, to take a course from Sarah Landry. Wonderful person, as well as a wonderful illustrator. But you can see in this image, she tells a story, in this case without words. But here we have a family group, and you can see they're taking care of offspring and grooming each other. And two individuals, this guy over here, and this guy who's looking at us, but has his ear cocked towards an approaching troop, we can see sort of the beginning of what might be a territorial interaction with a rival troop getting ready to do battle. This guy right here is stinking up his tail, so I guess he'll be more intimidating to their competitors. So you have this whole story, a sense of immersion, and things happening, in this case, without even any words. Just a lovely drawing. Okay, so Red Flower storyline. I kept it as simple as I could because, like I said, this is sort of a pilot or an investigation and so on. So simple was two inquisitive characters are going through the desert when ocotillos are in bloom. And they start chatting about interactions between ocotillos and various animals. So young Antonia, who's not in this picture, and who I refer to as Ant because I like that idea, happens to be pretty familiar with the desert. We'll see her in a bit. Let's see if I can get out of the way here. I'm a mirror image, so I go this way to go that way. But this guy, Ixop 2, is kind of encountering the desert for the first time. And this bird here is a bird you might have seen. This is a Western kingbird, and we'll see him again in a bit. So the basic storyline is essentially a walk in the desert, and two characters chat about what they see. Okay. So
Barbara, just for reference, and somebody just pointed out that I think you're maybe pointing at some characters or things with your cursor, but it's not showing up to us what you're pointing at.
Okay.
We're not able to see a pointer of any kind. Just
let's see if I can do this.
Although it's
here are my hands.
Yeah, we can see your hands. So if you point in the general direction, that might work.
I have to do everything opposite. I don't know if I can.
That's away. That's the right direction. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway,
I will try and indicate.
Share that since it was shared.
Yeah, I'll try and indicate by words rather than cursor. So some particulars on character design. I wanted this to be a a dialogue between two, not antagonistic, but dichotomous characters, very different from one another. And so hopefully you get an interplay between the two. So I wanted the two characters to have different experiences and different perspectives. And I wanted that to be reflected in their conversation. Another stipulation I wanted to make was that I would depict desert organisms, but I wasn't going to give them speaking roles or try and humanize them. And I think, in fact, when you do, if the rabbit talks, it essentially becomes a human in a bunny suit. And so I wanted to try and avoid that because if it isn't, say, disrespectful, and it might be, it could be misleading. I don't know if rabbits get angry. Maybe they do. So here's Ant or Antonia, and here's little Ixop right there. Okay. So Ant acts like a kid, as best I can remember a kid acts. It's been a little while for me. But I wanted her to just be exploring her surroundings. I didn't, in this case, want her actions to be directed. I have a question, I want to find out this. I wanted her just to encounter things and wonder about them or talk to her little Ixop alien friend about it. And I also wanted her to, I guess I'll say view every question as legitimate. With a lot of times, I'm by no means a literary expert, but a lot of times one character is a foil and they're kind of not as smart as the other guy, so Sherlock Holmes is always saying elementary, my dear Watson and stuff. So Watson's kind of the dumb guy. And I didn't want either of the characters to be dumb. And she's a little bit of a tomboy, so she runs around a lot, which adds some, I hope, activity to the narration. Okay. So she's answering a question right here about plants and plants' lack of mobility while she takes some kind of photograph with her phone, which she does not let go of. Okay. So Ixop is there for quite a bit of contrast. I wanted him to be distinctly imaginary so that, like I said, he doesn't look like an animal we know. And I wanted him to have a non-human perspective. And so I thought a plant-like one would be maybe a bit on the odd side. A lot of times when a character is, a made-up non-human, they're either a fearsome beast or a super intelligent human who looks different from us. So I wanted to try and shy away from those kinds of things. The other thing I wanted to do with him is I wanted him to have a different kind of experience from a human. So when we hike through the desert, grasshoppers, lizards, coyotes, rabbits, birds, they all get out of our way. We are giant animals. There are very few things in the desert that can harm us. So we kind of have this built-in armor. And a little creature, on the other hand, faces, say, risks of predation, like I mentioned here. But, if he blunders into a spider web, it could be a big deal. Whereas for us, it's kind of just annoying. If he gets hit by a raindrop, again, that could be a big deal. But for us, it's annoying at worst. And I wanted to give him some, I'm going to duck again, some abilities that humans don't have. I'm not including these in this particular story, but I kind of built them in as I was building the character. But he can fly, so he has different perspectives that way. He can change color. And that also adds a little bit of just interest or eccentricity to the story. But the main thing is you have this dichotomy and dialogue between two different individuals who see and experience the desert differently and who have different backgrounds and look at things from different perspectives. Okay, so that's the bare bones of what I've been up to. What I want to do now is just show you the pages that I've built so far. And like I said, I'm about halfway through. Okay, so this is the first page. I set up Ixop as the narrator. So these kinds of boxes are his. And in the first page, I'm kind of trying to suggest he's a bit uneasy. He sort of found himself on this unknown planet to discover. And these are all silhouettes of chain fruit cholla, which I think are a great plant analog for what a zombie looks like. So I thought they'd be kind of suitably spooky looking. I do want to modify this page because I don't think it's as immersive as I would like. So I consider this guy a draft, but the next ones I'm pretty well satisfied with. Okay, so page 2, I introduce Ant or Antonia, and she's right up against a cholla, or pretty close to one. And I kind of want to give the sense that Ixop is a bit of a family secret. I don't think you can read the text on these, but she's saying that she's not allowed to, her mom won't let her take pictures of Ixop. So that's meant to do that. And here we have another view of a Western kingbird kind of looking around, sitting on an ocotillo. And I have him taken off. He's going to do some exploring. And at this point, I tried to make him look as big as I could. And here's that Western kingbird taking another look. And on page 3, we find out he's not particularly large. And as I said, he's found himself vulnerable to this kingbird. And in panel 2, the kingbird takes a little nip out of him and he starts doing some dodging. So butterflies and moths take evasive action. Moths in particular tend to dive. So he's kind of doing that. And he also does something a little different. He starts developing eye spots on his wings. And as he does so, the bird, which was hot on his tail feathers or whatever, suddenly veers off. And he does a little more dodging and he says, oh, the eye spots worked, which he did on advice of Antonia. Okay. So he's had his first near-death experience. Okay. So page 4, Ant asks him if he's okay. He kind of says yes. And then he asks on this horizontal panel with the ocotillos, he asks what kind of red-headed creatures are below them. And she tells him that they're plants and that they drop their leaves when it gets dry. And then in the section below at the very bottom, I wanted to talk about a creature that feeds on ocotillo leaves, at least sometimes, and that's Eupicardia coletta. It's also called the Coletta moth. And you can see the caterpillar lower left there. And they get big, by the way, as big as a breakfast sausage or something like that. So they're very big moths. The adults have a wingspan that's about the length of my palm, so maybe 5 inches, something like that. And as giant silk moths, members of this group tend to emerge without fully developed mouth parts, so they cannot feed. and their lifespan is terminated when they run out of stored fat reserves and so forth. And the other thing that's cool about them, which I mentioned in that middle blue panel at the very bottom, is that males fly during the day. They follow pheromone trails that the females emit. And then at night, it's the females' turn. Once the females are mated, they start flying around looking for various host plants. So the male is the middle guy, or the upper moth, and the female is clinging to an ocotillo stem, and she's depositing a small number of eggs on a stem. But they're just amazing animals, really beautiful. I think the caterpillars are pretty neat looking too. So page 5, I have Ixop flying in for a closer look, and he's startled to find that there are all kinds of flying animals attending the ocotillo flowers. And he, assumes that the ocotillo, like he has recently been, is now under attack. But what I wanted to do with this page is start introducing a number of animals that actually visit these flowers. Some of these animals are genuine pollinators, and some of them are not. Some are nectar thieves. I suspect this little marine blue is probably more of a scavenger than a thief, because it can't cut into flowers like a nectar thief would. So here's that rufous hummingbird again. This is a two-tailed swallowtail. The two green guys are both halticid or sweat bees, carpenter bee, and a marine blue. Okay. This is page 6. So he's just getting brushed back by a Sonoran bumblebee. And she's telling him that, no, these animals are pollinating. And at this point he says, what? And she starts explaining what that means. The bee is flown off. And then on this panel, she says, after that, flowers make seeds. And he asks some more questions. But I wanted to talk about the importance of composition in putting these pages together. Because when people look at pictures, their eyes kind of dart around. So if you look at a portrait, and I guess people can do this, they can track your eye movements. What tends to happen is that people's eyes keep returning to say, look at the eyes on a portrait. They might bounce down to the mouth, over to the hair, to the background, and so on. And you can predict that most of the time, people will be looking at the eyes in the portrait, but you can't predict the sequence of eye movement. So it might go to the left eye and then to the person in the portrait's hair, the background, and then down to the mouth, and then up to the right eye, and so on and so on. And so the way we view pictures contrasts, and I guess you could say is in opposition to the way we read, because we read formally, left to right, top to bottom. So somehow, to keep the reader on track, you don't want to read the answer to a question, that a character giving an answer to a question before you hear the other character ask the question. So composition becomes essential, both in terms of making things visually pleasing, as well as guiding the reader so that they read things in the sequence you want them to. So in this one, we start, you see a bubble at the bottom of the upper left panel as Ixop gets brushed back. And then we obediently move to the right-hand panel, because that's how we've been taught to read. And she's looking up, so she kind of directs us upwards to Ixop saying, what are you talking about? And I could only put in the what because, again, I have space constraints. And then the bottom bubble in that panel, she gives her example of when birds and insects move pollen around, they're pollinating. And then we go to the lower left panel. And here X-Up kind of helps us out. We have that S-shaped flight path where he kind of guides us down from one speech bubble to the next. And then we can see him kind of diving into the last panel in the lower right. And again, we read left to right to look at the text. So in the second to last panel, he's asking, why don't the flowers just move pollen themselves? And she explains the plants are rooted to the ground. And the lack of mobility for plants, I presume, has driven this very strange way that plants reproduce. Or it's strange from a mammal's point of view, or a terrestrial vertebrate's point of view. Reproduction is an essential act by any living organism, and yet plants delegate it to a third party, some kind of animal pollinator or wind or water. And so from the standpoint of an animal, that's just crazy, you know. But the lack of mobility has presumably driven a good part of that. So his remark in the very last speech bubble, you know, he's thinking from his own point of view is, well, that's really generous of pollinators. And on the next page, he starts to redirect the logic on that one. Okay, so page 7 is in progress, and I wanted to show you what these things look like to start with. They look like acts of desperation or something. But what I do is I have a draft layer. I usually write in green for some reason, and I start working out the layout, where the dialogue is, and so on. And on this page, she's going to be explaining that many animals pollinate or visit flowers to get nectar, and they pollinate as they do so. And they're attracted to nectar because it's a substance they can't make. We don't photosynthesize, so we have to get sugars from either directly or indirectly from plants. And this is that same page. Most of what I drew, I've already destroyed and redrawn. And I've put in the dialogue, and I'm kind of building the drawings around that. And this has a long way to go. I mean, I've got to do a lot of resolving to get the outline drawing the way I want it, and then I'll add in some color. And this is different from the way comics and graphic novels were traditionally done, but because I'm both writer and artist in this case, I can build things this way, which smooths things out for me. Okay, so the rest of the story, I'm going to talk about pollinator exclusion, so to speak, how some plants, such as Ocotillo, I'm trying to get out of my own way here, there we go, tend to prefer certain kinds of pollinators, and so they, in some cases, will exclude others. I'm going to talk about nectar theft, and at least one documented potential response to nectar theft by Texas ocotillos. And I'm going to talk about Costa's hummingbirds, which is, they're a desert breeding hummingbird. And as it happens, the birds fledge right around the time that ocotillos are beginning to flower. So it's presumably a resource of great advantage to these hummingbirds, especially the young birds that are still working out the dynamics of flying and finding pollination sources. And then the last part, let's duck the right way, we find out a little bit more about the characters. Okay, so what this means is that I have a long, detailed punch list before I finish this project. I've got the remaining pages to draw, which is going to take, I hate to admit it, but months. I need to review and have it reviewed and edited to make sure it's accurate and flows, and that I don't leave the reader on a literary sandbar somewhere. I have to figure out how to publish and distribute it. And if all of that goes well, start thinking about another story. I decided that Aunt has a twin brother who's also interested in the sciences, but he's still being built, as is their interactors, as is Ixop's interactive symbiotic spaceship friend. Okay, so that's my talk. And I thank you very much for coming, and I'll be happy to answer questions. And let's see if I can shut off the screen share all by myself. Okay, see if this works. I might have to get help on this.
You did it.
You did it?
You did
okay.
it.
I didn't do it.
Something I might have done that.
Okay.
That was me.
So anyway, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
So folks, you can either chat or raise your hand or just speak out. I just have to say, what's TC stand for?
Oh, the T is for Anthony, shortened to Tony. It seems like a lot of times when people have twins, they give them similar names. And in this case, I diverged the two. I have no idea what the C means. I'll have to figure that out.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I told you this was a work in progress.
Yeah, that's a challenge. I like it. Christine, yeah, we will have a recording. We record all of our Tiamat stewards in service, and they're on our website. And I'll share that with everyone. And Barbara, if you want to share that with your contacts as well, then we'll share a recording.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of chats coming in. Great job. Fun, lovely work.
Yeah, thank you everybody for your compliments. I definitely appreciate that. I do plan to update people again. Can't say when, but keep me in mind, Trika, because I'd be happy to tell you where things have progressed to in some months.
Anyone have, there's a lot of like lovely work, great drawings, et cetera, et cetera. Any questions or curiosities that folks have? I was really, since nobody's speaking up, I'm just going to say, I was really interested in when like the development of the eye.
Ixop guy?
The eyes on the butterfly, which helped Ixop not to go for them. So there was a jump from one to the other, how that's conveyed. And I just love little things like that come in, that they're educational, but they're fun. And then how you have an action that, one would take action to exactly what that kind of adaptive trait has. Oh, that's no fair. What that adaptive trait is. I'm like, now I'm blathering because look what we have up there. But did you see what I'm saying? Like, just like you have an adaptation. Thank you, Erin. Just stop for a minute so I can concentrate. So like you have some kind of action happening, but then there's a real live adaptation that, in the desert that we experience and that your character experiences. So so that particular one regarding, you know, like the eye, like what led to that, and like we only got from one jump to the other.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to put in things like that. I guess as best I can to help a reader feel they're there and they're observing things too. I didn't, and I know this is perhaps a little tangential, but I didn't build this story with, you know, the origin of each character put in and stuff. In part because I wanted to dive into it, in part because I wanted to test the efficacy of this kind of medium to talk about natural history. So things like origins and build up to certain things, certain kinds of ideas, I think can come later. And sometimes it's nice just to dive in, you know, instead of saying, Antonia is called Aunt and she's a girl of approximately this age and she lives with her mother and her brother in a little house in Tucson and so on and so on. I wanted to get right into the natural history. I wanted to draw flowers. I wanted to draw bugs. I wanted to draw birds, you know, and I guess drawing other things is a way to get to drawing those things.
So here's a question from Christine. How is the same or different drawings of this type of art as opposed to like watercoloring? How is, you know, how's this medium versus say watercolor painting?
Well, that's a good one. I would say in some cases they're strongly similar. In my case, I tend to draw resolved things. In other words, draw a bird rather than suggesting a bird. But in many cases with watercolor, it's poetry. You can suggest things. You suggest a cloud or show a delicate wash or something like that. These drawings tend to be strongly, have a strong component of line to them. So many of the structures are outlined. So a black outline of each flower on those inflorescences. Whereas with watercolor, you tend not to want to outline things like that. And it's color and contrast that set different aspects of whatever it is you're painting apart. But yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. I have a lot of, I've done a lot of watercolors, so I hadn't thought about that. So I appreciate that.
Well, you could probably have that conversation with Christine in the future.
Yeah.
So Rachel, one of our Tillamook stewards, is just sharing that she loved that page with all the potential pollinators on the ocotillo flowers. I'm with you, Rachel. I loved that. And the sweat bees and the carpenter bees and the bumblebee. That was a great page. And it's not a question. She's just saying gorgeous colors and drawing. I totally agree.
I have to admit, if I had to pick a page, that would be the page I'd pick. Yeah, I like it. I like it too. Christine?
Barbara, where does Aesop come from?
Oh, well, there's a whole backstory on that. He is part of a small group of spacefaring nomadic aliens. And he's essentially a flying plant. His spaceship, what I did was I kind of flipped things. So with many earth plants, the plants have a relationship with nitrogen fixing bacteria and stuff. And so what I did in this case was I made a bacterium large enough to be a spaceship with the plant inside, which is the reverse of what you have in nature. which is these symbionts are, excuse me, in nodules on the roots of actual earth plants. So he's part of a symbiotic relationship, which I haven't described in this. And they're itinerants. They go between star systems. And as I was writing this, I started thinking that plants would actually do better in space than people, because they can be dormant for long periods, either as seeds or adults. So I don't know if that helps NASA at all, but just a thought. And they're orbiting Earth yet again. And there's a mishap with a little meteorite or something like that. The mothership is destroyed, and there are a few refugees on this little ship that crashes to Earth. And one of the reasons I built that particular backstory that way is that if this is a long-lived species, they could have visited Earth previously, and that would enable me to tell stories about Pleistocene animals, species in the Cretaceous, and so on, operating out of the extensive memory that's part of the spaceship's composition. So I have plans, I guess, or hopes, and that's kind of determined how some of the backstory was constructed.
Awesome. I see this as like seasons and episodes.
Yeah. The problem is, can I write and draw fast enough?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Hey, so there's a question there here. Will this end up as a book, or where will the original paintings end up? And my understanding is that this is going to be a book that you're producing, correct?
Yeah. This is all stuff I need to learn. Nowadays you can publish digitally or as hard copy, or both. I would like to do both. As far as original paintings go, the whole thing is done digitally. So all of those drawings were done on an iPad using a digital drawing program. So there isn't a paint and paper original to any of these. And that, I think, is the way I'll continue to go, because a digital medium is a bit more forgiving than a paint and paper one, where sometimes you can't erase or you can't change it. You have to do it over again. And this allows me a lot more flexibility. And I definitely like that. Oh, NFTs. Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, Disney's going to come calling, I'm sure. I would say one step at a time, Barbara, in answer to that one. But yeah, I am thinking about distribution. My aim really is to have as many people as I can be able to read and enjoy these kinds of things. I've known for years that I'm not an entrepreneur. What I really want is for people to see it. And that means I have to figure out these issues about publication and so forth. So that remains to be seen, but that's the way my thoughts are going.
That's great. So by the time young Eli there is ready to read and look at those pictures, he'll be able to hold it in his hands or look on the iPad. And everyone loved you. Direct your attention to the Aaron Reardon pain there with Ben and Aaron and Eli. That's really fun and distracting. Because actually, I totally believe, Barbara, that what you're doing is going to influence positively, you know, us, absolutely, but our younger generation as well. Educate and inspire. And oh, how great is
that? I hope so. I want Eli's first word to be Ocotillo.
Or Ixtops.
Yeah. That's too hard.
Well, I really want to respect everyone's time. As we're just over 7 p.m. right now. Any last questions or comments? Throw them out right now. And if not, I just really want to thank everyone for being here. Ben, any last words from you and Eli there?
Barbara, thank you for sharing. So fun to see this. Congratulations.
Really, thank you.
Yeah, just beautiful.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining, and thank you again for stewarding. Anyway, great to connect tonight. Yeah, so good night, everyone. Thank you.